දැන් වැඩි ග්‍රෑම් ගණනක් වැඩි සේවයක් සන්ලයිට් ග්‍රෑම් 60ක්ම රුපියල් 15ක් පමණයි.
Tonight, unanimous decision. All party leaders unanimously agreed to present 21st Amendment to Cabinet first. Abolishing executive presidency, a second step. Calls for sustainability. IMF wants adequate assurances on Sri Lanka reforms as debt unsustainable. Says will formulate concrete measures to support a timely resolution in Sri Lanka. Joint effort. India and Japan Prime Ministers resolved to work together to assist Sri Lanka during crisis. No stone unturned. Russian Foreign Ministry considering Sri Lanka's appeal for fuel supply support. All this and much more coming up this Friday, the 27th of May 2022.
Lifebuoy shampoo ලෙති කිරි ප්‍රෝටීන් සහ මල්ටිවිටමින් හිසකෙස් මුල සිට පෝෂණය කර ශක්තිමත් කරයි.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
And a warm welcome. You're joining us on AdaDerana 24, your English news service. And tonight in your headline making stories, the all-party leaders have unanimously agreed today that the 21st Amendment to the Constitution should be passed as soon as possible, as they point out to the reenactment of the 19th Amendment in the form of the 21st Amendment would be the first step. Making the abolishment of the executive presidency in the meantime would be the second step. Meanwhile, leader of the Jatika Jana Balawegaya Anura Kumara Disanayaka believes that the new Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe is not a suitable candidate to hold a position that will be given special powers through the 21st Amendment. This, he said, is because Premier Wickremesinghe is someone that commands the mandate, that does not command the mandate of the people, given that he lost at the parliamentary elections.
An all-party meeting was held today with the participation of Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe in order to discuss the draft of the 21st Amendment that was presented to the Cabinet earlier this week. Following the discussion, the senior Vice President of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, Nimal Siripala de Silva, said all participating in the meeting were in favour of the 21st Amendment and that it will be presented to the Cabinet on Monday the 6th of June for approval.
එන සඳුදා නෙවෙයි ඊළඟ සඳුදා අනිවාර්යයෙන්ම කැබිනට් මණ්ඩලයට මේ සංශෝධන ඉදිරිපත් කරන අතරම මේ පිළිබඳව උතුරේ දේශපාලන පක්ෂවල නියෝජිතයින් පැමිණි නොසිටිය නිසා ඔවුන්ටත් මේ පිළිබඳව කරුණු දැක්වීමට එන සතිය අවස්ථාවක් ලබා දීලා එය ඉදිරිපත් කිරීමට එකමතිකව තීරණය කරා.
However, the People's Liberation Front, which did not take part in the all-party meeting, said that they will submit their proposals in writing to the Ministry of Justice.
වර්තමාන අගමැතිවරයා පාර්ලිමේන්තු මැතිවරණදී පරාජයටපත් වූ අගමැතිවරයා. දැන් මොකද වෙන්නේ? මේ ආණ්ඩුක්‍රම ව්‍යවස්ථා සංශෝධනය හරහා එම අගමැතිවරයාට විශේෂ බලතල ලැබෙනවා. දැන් අපි හිතනවා ප්‍රජාතන්ත්‍රවාදී පැත්තෙන් බැලුවොත් මෙවැනි විශේෂ බලතල සයිල අග්‍රාමාත්‍ය තනතුරක් දැරීමට රනිල් වික්‍රමසිංහට සුදුසුකම් නැහැ. නම් ඒ බලය හොබවන්න නම් නව අග්‍රාමාත්‍යරේ ජනතාවගේ ජනවරමෙන් පත් කරගත යුතුයි. අනේම අග්‍රාමාත්‍යවරයාට සහ එම පාර්ලිමේන්තුවට තමයි මෙම 21 වෙනි සංශෝධනයෙන් පැවරෙන බලතල ලැබිය යුතු වන්නේ. ඒ නිසා වැදගත්ම සංශෝධනය තමයි අපි ගේන්නේ අන්තර්කාලීන විධිවිධානයක් අපි ගේනේනවා. මේ 21 වෙනි සංශෝධනය ක්‍රියාත්මක වීමේදී නව පාර්ලිමේන්තුවක් නව අගමැතිවරයෙක් තෝරාපත් කර ගැනීම සඳහා ජනවරමකට ඉඩ ලබා දී යුතුයි. ඒ සඳහා මෙම පාර්ලිමේන්තුවේ කාලය සීමා කළ යුතුයි. මෙම යෝජනාවන් අපි අපේ සංශෝධන හැටියට අපි බාර දෙන්න බලාපොරොත්තු වෙනවා.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi reassured that India will continue to stand with the people of Sri Lanka during its tough times. Speaking at the inauguration of a development project in Tamil Nadu, the Premier had said that India will continue to support democracy, stability and economic recovery in Sri Lanka. Meanwhile, during the same event, the Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu, M.K. Stalin, had requested the Premier to take over the island of Kachativu from Sri Lanka as a means of solving the issue of the fisheries community in the Tamil Nadu area.
Prime Minister of India Narendra Modi participated in the inauguration ceremony of a development project in Chennai, the state capital of Tamil Nadu, yesterday. Addressing the gathering, Tamil Nadu Chief Minister M.K. Stalin requested the Prime Minister to reclaim the Kachativu Island from Sri Lanka.
I would like to make a few key requests on behalf of the people to Prime Minister Modi, who is present today at Tamil Nadu. I request for the Kachativu Island to be reclaimed, as it would solve problems of the fishing community in the coastal areas of Tamil Nadu and establish their rights.
However, Premier Modi, delivering his speech, had not replied to the Chief Minister's request, but instead touched on the current situation in Sri Lanka.
Many Indian organizations and individuals have sent assistance for their brothers and sisters in Sri Lanka, including Tamils in the north, in the east, and in the upcountry. India has also spoken strongly in international fora for extending economic support to Sri Lanka. India will continue to stand with the people of Sri Lanka and support democracy, stability and economic recovery in Sri Lanka.
Now, the Japanese government says that both India and Japan have agreed to work together on assisting crisis-hit Sri Lanka following a recent meeting between Prime Ministers Narendra Modi and Fumio Kishida in Tokyo. These comments were made by leaders of Japan and India during the Japan-India summit meeting held on the sidelines of the Quad meeting. Following the meeting, Japan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said that the two leaders had discussed the situation in Sri Lanka and confirmed that they will cooperate with each other in light of the current economic crisis and deterioration of the humanitarian situation in Sri Lanka. Now, Japan's announcement of collaborating with India to help Sri Lanka comes shortly after Sri Lankan Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe's proposal at the Quad members that the United States, India, Japan and Australia take the lead in setting up a foreign aid consortium to assist Sri Lanka, that is, reeling under the worst economic crisis since the country's independence. Now, British High Commissioner to Sri Lanka Sarah Houlton said that the government of the United Kingdom is exploring investment options in Sri Lanka. She made these remarks during her meeting with Foreign Minister Professor G.L. Peiris yesterday at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The High Commissioner had said that while they understand the economic hardships that the country is undergoing, the United Kingdom is exploring both multilateral and bilateral ways in order to help the island nation overcome the present situation.
The High Commissioner of the United Kingdom in Sri Lanka, Sarah Houlton, called on Minister of Foreign Affairs Professor G.L. Peiris yesterday, where they discussed the bilateral engagements, domestic developments and assistance from the international community in overcoming the current economic challenges encountered by Sri Lanka. The Foreign Minister explained that the government was focused on ensuring that supplies of essential goods while devising coherent strategies to deal with several economic challenges. The High Commissioner stated that they understand the economic difficulties faced by Sri Lanka and added that they were exploring avenues of support towards Sri Lanka, including both bilateral and multilateral channels. The Foreign Minister highlighted the welfare measures that will be needed to put in place in order to target the most vulnerable sections of society. Meanwhile, Professor Peiris explained that the 21st Amendment to the Constitution is currently being studied by political parties. He said that despite the current economic challenges, the government was determined to make progress in addressing the post-conflict reconciliation-related issues. High Commissioner Houlton then stated that the UK government was examining investment options in Sri Lanka. She added that Sri Lanka has considerable potentials in sustainable energy projects and green bonds, which address the impacts of climate change.
Now, the International Monetary Fund, concluding its technical discussions with Sri Lankan authorities, said that since Sri Lanka's public debt is assessed as unsustainable, approval by the Executive Board of an IMF-supported program for Sri Lanka would require adequate assurances that debt sustainability will be restored. However, they continue to reaffirm their commitment to support Sri Lanka during the difficult times and also welcome the move of appointing financial and legal advisors to engage in a collaborative dialogue with the creditors as an important step towards restoring public debt sustainability.
The IMF-led technical assistance team held virtual discussions with Sri Lankan authorities starting from the 9th of May on an economic program that could be supported by an IMF-leading arrangement. The discussions concluded on Tuesday, the 24th of May. Following their conclusions, IMF released a statement saying that their team held technical discussions on a comprehensive reform package to restore macroeconomic stability and debt sustainability. The team said that they made good progress in assessing the economic situation and in identifying policy priorities to be taken going forward. IMF also said that the discussions focused on restoring fiscal sustainability while protecting the vulnerable and poor, ensuring credibility of the monetary policy and exchange rate regimes, preserving financial sector stability, and structural reforms to enhance growth and strengthen governance. IMF team welcomes the appointment of financial and legal advisors to engage in a collaborative dialogue with their creditors to an important step towards restoring public debt sustainability. The statement said that an approval by the executive board of an IMF-supported program for Sri Lanka would require adequate assurances that debt sustainability will be restored since Sri Lanka's public debt is assessed as unsustainable. Finally, they also said that they will continue to monitor the economic and political situation very closely and engage with the authorities to formulate concrete measures on an IMF-supported program, as well as broader stakeholders to support a timely resolution of the crisis and reaffirm their commitment to support Sri Lanka at this difficult time in line with the IMF's policies.
And to discuss the implications of the IMF program and debt restructuring in Sri Lanka, we thought of inviting to our studios Professor Shanta Devarajan, former chief economist for South Asia of the World Bank. Dr. Devarajan, now I think we've been talking about the IMF program and Sri Lanka's technical discussions with the IMF, which has just concluded. But what are the implications of this program and Sri Lanka's debt restructuring process as we speak today?
Implications will be once the program is approved by the IMF board. Hello?
Sorry, I don't hear you, Dr. Devarajan. I think there's a technical. Do you hear me now?
I hear you fine. Yeah, I've heard you throughout.
I think we will take a short break right now. Do you hear me now, Dr. Devarajan?
I hear you, yeah. Do you hear me?
Yes, I do. I hear you now. So I was asking you, as we talk about debt restructuring and as we talk about the IMF-supported program in Sri Lanka, technical discussions have just concluded. What are the implications on Sri Lanka at this present moment?
The implications will become clear once the IMF program is approved by the IMF board and there has been sufficient progress towards debt restructuring. Mm-hmm. Now, the reason we should consider it is that frequently there's a stereotype that when there is an IMF program approved, there's austerity and hardship on the population because they have to cut the fiscal deficit in order to accommodate. But the situation in Sri Lanka is very different because Sri Lanka is going through austerity and hardship right now. There's a shortage of fuels and food and cooking gas. There's power cuts 10 hours a day. This is a hugely painful process that the people of Sri Lanka are going through before an IMF program has been concluded. Furthermore, I think most of the people recognize that the reason for the hardship that they're facing now were the fact that there were bad policies pursued by the government for about 2 years that led to a depletion of the foreign exchange reserves. And now they're facing the shortages because there's no foreign exchange with which to buy imports. But the fact is that those policies that led to the shortages are precisely the policies that an IMF program is trying to reverse. We're trying to make sure we don't go into this situation once again. If we pursue these policies, if we continue to cut taxes and subsidize goods, the situation would have been much worse. So the IMF program and the debt restructuring are a way of making sure that things are improving they would actually allow Sri Lanka then relax the foreign exchange constraint somewhat, so that Sri Lanka will then have access to resources with which to buy imports and relieve the shortages. In fact, once an IMF program is signed by the IMF board, actually enables the World Bank to provide $1 billion or more as budget support to the government to finance, and importantly, targeted cash transfers to the poor to cushion the effects of the tax increases and expenditure cuts that are coming.
Dr. Devarajan, now I think Sri Lanka's new Prime Minister has been talking about a welfare budget as an interim budget as we speak now, given the difficulties and the hardships that the most vulnerable segments of our society are facing, and at the same time, as you mentioned, the fuel crisis to food shortages, essential medicine. So in the interim, right now, what do you recommend that we do going forward while we await a conclusion of the discussions and the evaluation by the IMF?
Well, in the interim, what we need to do is to get some bridge financing in order to buy the imports that are essential imports that are needed. And that is actually what people are working on, trying to get, I think they already have about $1 billion or $1.5 billion from India as bridge financing. There's some discussions with China and Japan that likely to bring in the resources while the IMF program is negotiated. Once the IMF program is negotiated, as I said earlier, it'll not only bring in some resources from the IMF, but it opens up the possibility of resources from the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank and possibly some bilateral donors. It also increases confidence in the Sri Lankan economy, and that actually helps with debt restructuring as well, because the creditors are more likely to give a reduction in the debt if they think that the program is a credible adjustment program, that Sri Lanka will restore fiscal sustainability going forward. Then they're likely to be willing to cut their debt even more.
Also, Dr. Devarajan, we heard the president, the chief of the World Bank, warning of a global recession that we cannot avoid amidst the war in Ukraine and the slowdown in China. Sri Lanka will have to face this recession too as we move forward. How do we prepare for this while other countries of the world are also facing the challenges of this world economic challenges?
Well, again, Sri Lanka has been facing those challenges before the recession. It's been a challenge for the last 2 years. So this is going to make it worse. But it's not the first time that Sri Lanka has had to deal with this. The main effect, certainly of the Ukraine war, has been an increase in fuel prices and now an increase in food prices and wheat prices in particular. The recession that the president of the World Bank was referring to is actually not just the war in Ukraine and even the COVID pandemic, but it also might come from the response of the large developed countries like the US and the European Eurozone in responding to inflation. See, when you really have an acceleration of inflation in most of the world, especially the US and Europe, and usually the way countries respond to that is by raising interest rates. So when you raise interest rates, you do bring down inflation, but what you're doing is bringing down demand in the economy. And that can lead to a recession, and it's a question of how serious that's going to be. So that might lead to a slowdown in the recovery. I think Sri Lanka is poised to have a recovery of economic growth once we have the debt restructuring and the IMF program, but it may not be as strong a recovery if the whole world is in a recession. We'll have fewer tourists and fewer remittances and things like that.
In your view, finally, as we talk about the recovery that Sri Lanka is poised to achieve, where will we be in the mid to long term while we address these immediate challenges in the short term?
Oh, I think Sri Lanka is potentially in a very good place because of all the assets that the country has. You have a very highly educated population, you have a great location, and it's a very nice place to be, and so it's attractive to tourists and things like that. So I think Sri Lanka has the potential to be a booming economy, and particularly in the service sectors, the high-skilled service sectors, which would make use of the highly educated population, and using its location for a booming tourist and other kinds of foreign investment sectors. So I'm confident that Sri Lanka can weather this crisis, and it is a crisis, and it's a really hard crisis. But I think some of the reforms that we're putting in as part of the response to the crisis will set the stage for rapid and inclusive economic growth going forward.
Thank you very much, Professor Devarajan, for joining us on the news live tonight. Thank you for joining us virtually. We had with us Professor Shanta Devarajan, the former chief economist for South Asia World Bank. We'll see you after the short break.
Big Three.
Welcome back. With Sri Lanka currently battling to overcome a power crisis, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa called on all power sector officials to assist in making a significant contribution from renewable energy sources to the national grid. During a meeting held with the sector officials last evening, he instructed them to promote rooftop solar, which the Secretary to the Ministry of Environment also pointed out as effective and causes less environmental destruction.
Last evening, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa met with officials of the power sector in the country at the President's house in Colombo to discuss issues faced when obtaining the contribution of renewable energy sources to power generation. At the meeting, it was highlighted that the potential is already there to generate nearly 700 megawatts of electricity via solar energy. However, the public opinion it has not been made possible due to the opposition of engineers attached to the Ceylon Electricity Board.
කවුරුත් දන්නවනේ සෝලා හරිය රිනියුවබල් එනර්ජි වලින් තමයි අපිට මේකේ විසඳුමක් තියෙන්නේ කියන එක. කෙටියෙන්ම යන්න පුළුවන් රූෆ්ටොප්. ඉතින් ඒක ප්‍රොමෝට් කරන්න. හැමදාම මතයක් තියෙනවා CB එකට ඉන්ජිනියර්ස්ලා මේකට විරුද්ධයි කියලා. ඉතින් මේක නැති කරගන්න ඔයගොල්ලෝ මෙතන සහයෝගයෙන් ඇතුව මේක ඉක්මන් කරලා කරන්න.
The Secretary to the Ministry of Environment, Dr. Anil Jasinghe, said that a large area of land could be saved by utilizing the roofs of government buildings, including schools and hospitals, in the process of generating electricity from solar energy. At the moment, the cost incurred for a single unit of electricity from petroleum is 100 rupees, while the amount is 50 rupees using coal. The Director General of the Public Utilities Commission, Damita Kumarasinghe, said that over $300 billion can be saved annually if renewable energy sources were used instead. With thermal power generation costing over $100 billion a month, Minister of Power and Energy Kanchana Wijesekara pointed out that it will be a difficult task to supply electricity at current prices. With that being the case, President Gotabaya called on the sector officials to assist in making a significant contribution from renewable energy sources to the national grid.
Operations at the Skanda oil refinery, which was closed since the 20th of March, will resume crude oil refining process in the next 6 days. Minister of Power and Energy Kanchana Wijesekara said earlier that a shipment of crude necessary for refining was unloaded today. Meanwhile, the Russian Foreign Ministry said it is now considering the next steps to provide assistance as per an appeal received from Sri Lanka for assistance in overcoming the energy crisis.
The operations at Sri Lanka's only oil refinery owned by the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation, located in Skanda, came to a standstill on the 20th of March this year, following the country's inability to import crude oil due to the dollar crisis. However, a decision was made by the new cabinet to reopen the refinery and recommence its operations by importing crude oil again. Operations of the refinery was expected to resume as soon as crude oil shipments was unloaded today. In a tweet yesterday, Minister of Power and Energy Kanchana Wijesekara said that the refinery will start producing fuel in 6 days. Fuel production at the Skanda oil refinery can meet 14% of the country's petrol demand and 29% of the demand for diesel. Meanwhile, in a tweet this morning, the subject minister said that by 8:30 am, plants owned by the Ceylon Petroleum Storage Terminal and the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation have 20,598 metric tons of autodiesel and 1,778 tons of superdiesel. The terminals also have 42,750 tons of 92-octane petrol and 6,579 metric tons of 95-octane. As inadequate fuel stocks are distributed to refilling stations island-wide, the government continues to urge people to not queue at fuel stations to stockpile fuel. Currently, raids are underway to arrest those who stockpile fuel. In Akurasa, a suspect was arrested for hoarding 400 litres of petrol that were to be later sold at black market prices. Another suspect was nabbed in Piliyandala with 180 litres of diesel and 7 litres of petrol in his possession. The suspect is said to be the son of an employee at a filling station. In this backdrop, police have developed an online application to collect information on the number of litres pumped by a vehicle in order to prevent stockpiling.
පොලිස් මුලස්ථානයේ පරිගණක කොට්ටාශය මගින් fuel IMC නැමැති ස්මාර්ට් ජංගම දුරකථන සඳහා වූ යෙදවුමක් සකස් කොට තිබෙනවා. ඒ යෙදවුම මේ වන විට කොට්ටාශ භාර නිලධාරීන්ට සහ ස්ථාපතිවරුන්ට යවා තිබෙනවා. ඔවුන්ට උපදෙස් දෙනු ලැබුවා ඒ ප්‍රදේශයේ සිටින ඉන්ධන හල් හිමියන් සමග සාකච්ඡා කොට ඔවුන් කැමති නම් ඉන්ධන හල් හිමියන් වෙත මෙම යෙදවුම ලබා දීමට එම යෙදවුම මගින් කෙරෙන්නේ ඉන්ධන හලට ඉන්ධන ලබා ගැනීමට පැමිණෙන වාහනවල ලියාපදිංචි අංකයන් fuel IMC කියන යෙදවුමට ඇතුළත් කරනු ලබනවා. යම්කිසි අවස්ථාවක පංච අංකය සඳහන් කරනු ලැබූ වාහනය නැවත වරක් යම් ස්ථානයකින් ඉන්ධන ලබා ගන්නේ නම් එම ස්ථානයත් හඳුනා ගැනීමේ හැකියාව ලැබෙනවා.
In the meantime, the Minister of Power and Energy met with bunker oil operators in the country yesterday. During the meeting, approval was given to all private bunker fuel companies to import and provide necessary fuel requirements of industries to function their generators and machinery. In a tweet, the minister said that as a result of the burden on the CPC and fuel stations will be eased. Meanwhile, Sri Lanka is exploring more avenues to obtain international assistance to overcome the fuel crisis in the country. In this backdrop, the Russian foreign minister said yesterday that they have received an appeal from Sri Lanka for assistance in overcoming the energy crisis raging in the country and is now considering the next steps to provide assistance. The Russian foreign ministry has told its state-owned news agency Sputnik that they can confirm such appeals have indeed been received by the government of the Russian Federation and the Russian embassy in Sri Lanka, and added that the question of how Moscow can help Colombo is still under consideration and that it is too early to talk about concrete steps.
The police stated today that they arrested 2 suspects in connection with the murder of MP Amarakirti Athukorala. 2 others were arrested in connection to causing serious injuries to MP Kumar Velagama on the 9th of May. Police media spokesperson SSP Nihal Talduwa said that the CID arrested a 37-year-old and a 30-year-old for attacking and causing serious injury to MP Velagama. He also went on to say that a 27-year-old and a 53-year-old residents from the area of Nittambua were arrested in connection with the murder of MP Amarakirti Athukorala. Meanwhile, 6 suspects who are currently in remand custody for attacking the peaceful protesters at the Golfes Green and Kolpiti were presented before an identification parade today. Following this, the Colombo Magistrate Court ordered for the suspects to be remanded until the 31st of this month. In the meantime, the Gota Go Home protest site at the Golfes Green marked its 49th consecutive day today. Now, the Prime Minister's office issued a clarification on media reports in circulation, stating that the salaries of public sector employees are expected to be increased in the coming interim budget. A statement released by the Prime Minister's office said that Premier Ranil Wickremesinghe has not taken any decision pertaining to a salary hike for those in the public service. The statement went on to say that relief will be provided to the general public through the interim budget while reducing allocations to all ministries. However, allocations to the health and educational ministries will not be slashed. Welcome back. Colombo stocks ended the week in red as the all share price index declined by 0.05% to end trading at 8,315.55. Now, the S&P SL20 index of more liquid stocks ended at 2,733.04, following a loss of 0.42%. The share volume was 103 million, while market turnover was 1.5 billion rupees. During the week, the ASPI gained 0.60% and S&P SL20 lost 0.65%, recording an average daily turnover of 1.98 billion rupees. Food, beverage and tobacco were the top contributors to turnover, while transportation was the second highest. Foreign purchases in the meantime amounted to 22 million rupees, while foreign sales stood at 63 million rupees. World shares in the meantime rose and the dollar weakened on after data showed that US consumer spending rose in April and the uptick in inflation slowed, two signs the world's largest economy could be on track to grow this quarter. Consumer spending, which accounts for more than two-thirds of the US economy, increased 0.9% last month, and although inflation continued to increase in April, it was less than in recent months. The MSCI World Equity Index, which tracks shares in 45 nations, rose to 10.29 points or 1.61% at about 10.30. Global equity funds saw inflation in the week to May 25th for the first week in 7. European shares hit a 3-week high, rising to 1.33%. Britain's FTSE also hit a 3-week high and was heading for its best weekly showing since mid-March. Meanwhile, the Dow Jones Industrial Average rose by 256.38 to 32,898.57, while the S&P 500 gained 66.27. In the meantime, the Nasdaq Composite added 284.27 points today. The World Bank's chief has warned of a global recession threat as the price of food, energy and fertilizer jump caused by the ongoing war in Ukraine and a series of coronavirus lockdowns in China, adding to concerns about a slowdown. World Bank President David Malpass told a business event in the United States that it is difficult to see how the world could avoid a recession. While his comments comes the latest warning over the rising risk that the world economy may be set to contract, some economies are already feeling the impact of the challenges.
The World Bank cut its global economic growth forecast for this year by almost a full percentage point to 3.2% from an earlier 4.1% due to the impacts from the Ukraine-Russia war. The World Bank said it was responding to the added economic stresses by proposing a new 15th-month crisis financing target of $170 billion with a goal to commit about $50 billion to this financing over the next 3 months. Forecasts were cut for advanced and many developing economies because of spikes in food and energy prices caused by war-related supply disruptions. Adding to the worries, World Bank Chief David Malpass yesterday warned of a looming global recession, saying the idea of energy prices doubling is enough to trigger a recession by itself. Without giving a specific forecast, the chief of the global lender said it is difficult to see how the world could avoid a recession.
And that's all from us. Have a pleasant evening.